of the American problem, right? Now, the issue with Trump's ultimatum is that it is, at the end of the day, it's going to be very self-defeating. The problem with his ultimatum is telling the world that, all right, if you follow BRICS anti-American policies, we'll slap an additional 10% tariff on you. But this opens up a whole can of worms. What does he really mean when it comes to anti-American policies, right? Does it mean trading with China? Does it mean trading with Russia, buying Russian oil? Or does it just mean trading with BRICS as a whole? And this really opens up a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty with trading partners all over the world. I mentioned before, for example, if Europe decides to trade with China and they bypass the dollar and they use either euros or Chinese yuan in their transactions, does this also mean it's a kind of anti-American policy? And if you want to slap countries with an additional 10% tariff on it, you're going to essentially blow up world trade. Now, just imagine if you're a country and then you're facing an additional 10% barrier on top of whatever you need to pay, right? Maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 30%, now it's 40%. What are the chances of your goods actually making it to the American market at the end of the day? It's going to be slim to none, and Slim has just left the building. And if we look at the growing block, the growing economies that's really going to power up over the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be the BRICS. And that means a lot of trade flows will eventually flow towards the bloc and not towards the US. And this is bad on so many factors for the US economy, right? It actually accelerates the dollarization. A lot of money will not eventually flow back to American markets. And Trump is just going to accelerate his biggest fear.
Yeah, great points. And Anastasia, Dmitry Medvedev, second in command in Russia, he said this. He said, BRICS is gaining authority. Trump announced an additional 10% tariff would be imposed on any country that supports BRICS' policy. So we're doing everything right. Anastasia, talk about your reaction to what occurred at the BRICS Summit. There was, some maybe pessimism about it in the beginning, but it seems that it ended with some optimism.
First, I would like to say that Trump posts so frequently on his social media, so it's not the first time that he tries to frighten BRICS. So you remember that he actually, in anger, he was telling that 100% tariffs will be imposed on BRICS nations and so on. So I think a lot of people got used to that fact that Trump is talking, and sometimes one day one thing, another day is the opposite. So in my opinion, 10% tariff, again, that narrative that to scare BRICS countries, the partner belt and so on. President Lula responded that, I think, very clear. And he was very clear about that, talking that we do not need an emperor here. We are sovereign countries. So we may translate that, who cares about that 10% or what Trump says. Then about your question, the expectations, actually from the very beginning, just a few weeks away, when it became public that President Putin will not go and President Xi Jinping will not be present, I read a lot of articles and a lot of opinions that all the two leaders of that power, Putin and Xi Jinping, are not at the summit, and it may weaken the summit, the picture of the summit itself. But may I read one comment our subscriber left? And after reading that comment, I rethought my idea. Wait a second. Interesting shift in BRICS. Xi Jinping is skipping the summit for the first time in 12 years. China says it's a scheduling conflict, but many see it as a sign that China's taking a more selective approach to global leadership. Meanwhile, India and Brazil are stepping up, and BRICS continues expanding with Indonesia now a full member. This could be China subtly recalibrating its role while letting other nations take the spotlight for now. Things are definitely changing on the global stage. After reading that comment, I realized that that might be a point. And we have seen during the summit that President Lula and Indian Prime Minister, they took the spotlight. So that might be, I don't know, not a scheduled approach, but it definitely may happen. I don't know what our colleagues from China may say about that.
There have been criticisms even of the New Development Bank, for example, not being able to kind of being under the stranglehold still of the dollar. But there were big discussions about creating an alternative to SWIFT, a proposal. And we know that Russia's finance minister was a big part of that, Mr. Sulianov.
Yeah, look, I think in the lead up to the summit, a lot of people bring to the table a lot of emotional investment and hope. And in many regards, particularly as we live in a social media age, we're looking for instant fixes. This tends not to be how global systems work. They tend to grind away with their own temporalities and their own rhythms. And often we feel as individuals that events move very, very slowly. And in some regards, I think many people who hope for change in the world are just desperately wanting there to be a big bang event that ushers in the change. This particular BRICS summit, I think, did mark an important episode in this unfolding processes of multipolarity development, not just because of some personnel issues, which of course can animate people quite a lot, but more because it really, I think, put a stake in the ground that countries were not going to be bullied, that they were going to continue focusing on the things that mattered to them from an economic development and peaceful prosperity point of view, and that they would continue to find pathways to collaborate with each other and progress the interests of the global south. And I think that that's probably the most important thing to remember. Let's not forget it was only 3.5, 4 months ago when the 100% and then 150% tariff threats were leveled at BRICS. And clearly that was not enough to dissuade countries from being involved, because people, frankly, are a little bit tired of where things are at, and they want to progress reform in the world in ways that create space for developing countries to, one, have more say in how the world works, and secondly, also to ensure that they are able to benefit from the opportunities of economic and social development that have been denied to them for many decades. So I tend to sort of be neither optimistic nor pessimistic, I guess, when I look at events like this, but really try to contextualize them in these long processes of systemic transformation. The last Trump missive in his social media tweet about the 10% stuff, as Sean mentioned, creates a lot of confusion, of course, because talk of things like aligning with and, well, what does any of that sort of stuff mean? But that notwithstanding, I think it sends a very powerful message, and that is that the fundamental raison d'etre of BRICS, which is to ensure developing countries can unify and deal with global bullies, has been reaffirmed. This is precisely why institutions like BRICS emerged and why they continue to grow. And the more that the United States and President Trump persists with this kind of communications and bullying tactics, I think the more strength the global south will get. In fact, from a PR point of view, I don't think they could ask for anything better than that particular tweet.
Despite that text, that message that Trump left on his social media, I do not think that many countries got scared of that. Look at Malaysia, what their minister told today after the BRICS summit, that it's a golden chance for the country and they are not going to lose it.
Now, look,
Even with tariffs, without tariffs, or that they just want to follow that way that was decided during the BRICS Summit. And they saw the opportunity BRICS might give to Malaysia, for example, if we take this example.
I mean, Anastasia, I think gives a good kicking off point to, you've been covering tariffs quite deeply. As the BRICS Summit was happening, Trump was rolling out, this 90-day pause or whatever it was seems to have completely ended. And now tariffs are flying. So, Sean, this seems to be the weapon of choice for the U.S., the Trump administration in particular, against BRICS and the rising BRICS countries, particularly China. But now it seems like it's the entirety of the global South. Your analysis of what the actual effect of this is. You've been covering this quite deeply. I want to know your thoughts.
No, I think that tariffs are ultimately self-defeating in a very, very disastrous way. Now, if we think back on the first weapon used by Washington back during the Biden administration, it was the confiscation of Russian assets, right? Now, that sent a shockwave throughout the whole world. It just showed that America's overreach is really astounding. It can go and confiscate the reserves of a sovereign country when it comes to treasury bonds and any other assets out there. Now, the problem with the tariffs versus the confiscation is that the confiscation, the Americans can always argue it away, right? We are only going to do it to our enemies, whether it is Iran, whether it's Russia, or whether it's maybe China in the future, who knows? But the problem with the tariffs is that it's universal. It affects every single country out there. And let's remember that the baseline tariff is around 10%, could be even more, right? If no one responds to the letters sent by Scott Bessent. Now, the problem with this is that when you impose a 10% tariff or more to the world, it actually makes it much harder to export to the US. So right now, countries, they have a very big choice to make, right? Let's say they really want to sell to the Americans, sell to the American market. Somehow, they need to bring down their cost of production. So let's say XYZ country or Penguin Island, for example, gets hit with a 20% or 30% tariff. Now, in order to sell your products all the way to the Americans, you need to lower down your cost of production by maybe 20 or 30%, right? And how are you going to do that? Now, the only countries in the world that can really give you those kind of industrial inputs are countries in the BRICS. Not just Russia, not just Indonesia. The linchpin that we all should be looking at is China. Now, it's quite interesting that if we look at Chinese exports over the last 3 months, I think once the reciprocal tariff started in April, instead of it actually going down, it went up in aggregate. So yes, Chinese exports to the US fell by 20, 30 or 40%. No one's really denying that. But if you look at the exports to the rest of the world, it's growing by 20, 30, 40% in some cases to all these countries, right? We just need to look at Europe. Now, Europe, they are buying more from China, right? The Europeans like to say that, Chinese this, Chinese that, we don't like the Chinese, they're going to destroy our industries. But at the end of the day, they still need to buy cheap Chinese inputs and from the rest of the countries as well, whether it's Malaysia, Indonesia, the rest of BRICS. And because of that, the Americans has really sandwiched themselves in a very unviable position. It's not good. So the rest of the world right now, as a result of Trump's tariffs, they are forced to trade more with BRICS, right? Whether they like it or not, they need to lower their cost of production. So what happens now is Trump has actually accelerated the dollarization like never before. So countries, a lot of exporters and importers, they're talking with each other right now. So a Chinese exporter can go to, let's say, an importer in Rome and can say that, all right, let's say we just transact in bilateral currencies, you pay in yuan, and we'll give you a 2-3% discount, right? And in this era where margins are so razor thin, 2 to 3% is enough to either help you make a profit or you can just crash everything. So in this sense, it really kickstart the entire flywheel, entire cycle of countries just abandoning the dollar, not because they hate the dollar. Maybe they just want a discount, or whether they just pissed off at the US, it doesn't really matter. Trump essentially has started his own nightmare with his entire tariff war. And I think he's not going to like the end results of what's going to happen down the next 5, 10, or 20 years.
Anastasia, perhaps you can talk about, in response to what Sean just said, you know, Russia's finance minister played a particularly big role at the BRICS Summit, Anton Silyanov, and he made a lot of comments to the media. This is one thing he said in response to a question about the use of national currencies in BRICS trade. He said, quote, "Such settlements have proven their reliability and independence from Western lending institutions that at any moment, as it turns out, can suspend payments." So, Anastasia, talk about the role in particular that Russia played at this BRICS summit, as well as in this larger drive toward de-dollarization.
Anton Silyanov, as a finance minister, of course, participated in the BRICS summit, and he continued the way that was paved during the Kazan summit last year, when we heard first time that the new payment system should be implemented in BRICS. And of course, this year, there were a lot of speculations about some, I don't know, news that it will be a common currency among BRICS, there won't be, and etc. But the main thing the minister wanted to say, and he told that the local currencies play enormous role in trade. And he told that, for example, Russia and China, they're trading in national currencies. And he told that also that national currencies exchange, it's not only for Russia important, it's important for all BRICS nations. If we take an example of Brazil and China, it's the same. If we take Iran and China, it's the same. They're trading in yuan and Iranian currency. So in Russia, this topic of rubles exchange and yuan exchange, it's very relevant. So they talk about it quite often. And I think in few, I don't know, months maybe, we will see new BRICS payment system ready for use. I think I have this feeling. Everything will be dependent on how central banks of BRICS countries and financial ministers will work together.
90% of trade between BRICS countries already is done in their local national currencies. So if you could talk about the significance of this, because the Western mainstream media was downplaying the significance of this summit for a very particular reason. But even Bloomberg had to say, well, you can't really ignore BRICS anymore. Talk about why that is.
Well, they've been trying to ignore BRICS now for well over a decade, much to their own loss, really. The global economic system has been evolving quite significantly now for the best part of the last 3 decades, to a point where the center of gravity has quite clearly shifted away from the transatlantic economies, and particularly the United States as its pivot point. These days, the US market provides about 14% or a little bit less of total global imports, which is a significant reduction from where it was even 25 years ago. And the point of mentioning that is simply to demonstrate that the contours of global commerce and value flows continue to shift, and that the US is no longer in a position to unilaterally dictate terms. And this ultimately underpins why there is an evolution away from the use of the United States dollar as the principal trade settlement currency. The evolution of the payment system will, in a sense, go along with the ongoing changes to the structure of global production distribution and the complementarities between different economies that engage in trade with each other. One of the interesting issues that emerges when you're dealing with bilateral trade is, in the event that there are imbalances between 2 trading parties, it can create ultimately liquidity problems in relation to settlements with national currencies. But these liquidity challenges are progressively overcome through a number of mechanisms. One is bilateral swap agreements. The other one, of course, is simply by expanding the network of trading partners so that there is a greater number of trading pairs that enables enterprises in different countries to buy and sell their goods with each other and ultimately deliver, I guess, a trading ecosystem in which there is sufficient liquidity to settle accounts at the end of each day. The interesting thing about payment systems is that they really are mechanisms by which central banks of participating countries make ledger adjustments each day. So what gets added on one gets minus from another, and information needs to pass amongst central banks that will enable that to happen, and for those ledgers to be updated and maintained with a level of confidence amongst the participating parties that the updates are taking place and that the updates are accurate and are reflective of the situation across the whole network. So, look, this particular BRICS summit is significant because it simply consolidates all of that. It demonstrates that the global South nations are not going to be bullied, that they see mutual benefits in pursuing trade. They understand that there is safety and security in collaboration and in numbers, and that there is a lot of risk in not creating these sorts of institutions that can protect them from the capricious reach of the United States political arm. So I think that that's where we're at. I mean, these are just sort of reflective of long-term structural changes. People get obsessed with trade. Trade's really a consequence of production systems and the allocation or the distribution of that globally. And we're seeing that continue to evolve over time as developing countries enhance their own capabilities with infrastructure, with energy systems, and ultimately with access to raw materials, of which the BRICS nations have abundant supplies of. So look, that's where I think the significance is that this is really the return of the real economy, right? Over financialization and understanding that value ultimately is use value underpinned by the ability of enterprises to transform energy and material properties within national economies.